The reality on the high street here is very much the same as we're seeing across the country. Stores like this, First Choice, the travel agents, closed down. The Works, the bookshop there, closed down. Here, a former sports shop also closed down. And although it's only today that the figures officially say we're in recession, it's something that the shoppers and the traders here in Macclesfield are all too aware of.
There has been a noticeable downturn. A lot of people are very up in the air about what they're doing. No one knows whether the jobs are going to be secure.
30 years, I've never seen it like this before. No, not quite so bad.
Well, obviously with Woolworths and all the shops closing, I mean, we've got numerous shops now which are empty, so obviously the retail sales are falling quite drastically.
No, it's difficult when the shops are shutting and you're struggling to, you have to go out of town to do your shopping, really, because the shops are shutting down so quickly.
I don't know what will happen to it, to be honest. I think Macclesfield, if it's not careful, will just disappear altogether.
In this area alone, there's loads of shops closing down. The rates are too high, business rates, rents, everything.
Captain Brown says he's not responsible for the fact that something very nasty has flown into the turbines of the British economy, but he is using his skill and experience to avoid disaster. One thing he's been very clear on, this is a global, not a British problem.
We've been unable to remain unaffected by a global downturn.
It's clear that this is a global problem that requires global solutions.
In a global crisis, you actually get people to work together for global solutions.
Gordon Brown is adamant there can be no placing the blame for Britain's financial or economic problems at his door. But that position has come under pressure recently. Last night, the chair of the Financial Services Authority said that aspects of the regulatory system had been seriously deficient. Who set up that system, you might ask? Gordon Brown. The Financial Services Authority, along with the Treasury and the Bank of England, regulates banks. Together, they are known as the Tripartite system, designed by Gordon Brown. In a speech last night, the FSA's new chair, Adair Turner, said the system needed to change.
There was an intellectual failure to understand that we were building a system which had huge systemic risk. The whole system was risky. We need crucially to make sure that we and regulators throughout the world regulate near banks and shadow banks as if they were banks. There were institutions which grew up, which in total across the world were not regulated as banks, but were doing bank-like functions. And in future, we're going to say, if it looks like a bank and quacks like a bank, we're regulating it like a bank.
I think he's stating an obvious truth. It's the point which the Governor of the Bank of England has made as well. The errors, the problems which led to this debt crisis, the debt boom and bust, really cannot be blamed all on outside the UK. A lot of it stems from decisions made in the UK over interest rates, bank regulation, and also the lending practices of banks themselves.
But Lord Turner's words are in contrast to Gordon Brown's view. Even after Northern Rock collapsed, the Prime Minister insisted the tripartite system was working well.
We have prevented the spreading over of the problems of Northern Rock to other institutions in the way that some people predicted. And therefore, that is a sign of the financial system and the system itself, the tripartite system, working well.
Adair Turner's comments today are a condemnation of the 1997 financial regulatory framework that Gordon Brown set up when he came into office and that he was defending as recently as the end of 2007 after the Northern Rock crisis. Adair Turner has now identified some of the fundamental problems with that regime which have to be put right if we're going to be able to have a much more stable and secure financial markets infrastructure in Britain in the future.
And there's another difficult question for Gordon Brown to answer, and it is this. If Britain's problems come from outside, are global, but we are better placed than most countries to deal with them, as he says, well, how come the pound has tanked recently? That suggests, at least, that the markets think that Britain's economic strength has declined relative to other countries.
The idea that the UK is better placed than other countries was always just political spin. It had no substance at all. The UK is more vulnerable than most countries to this global financial crisis because we had a bigger build-up in household debt and in corporate debt. We had a bigger growth of domestic demand. Having had a bigger boom, we now are having a bigger bust.
Well, the former Conservative Cabinet Minister and MP Peter Lilly is here with me. So too is Labour MP Geoffrey Robinson, successful businessman, and you'll remember former Paymaster General. Welcome to you both. Thanks for coming in. For Geoffrey Robinson, it seemed the crisis actually saved Gordon Brown. That's not true anymore, is it?
Well, I don't think we can be so firm in either judgment, actually. Gordon Brown is Gordon Brown as he was then and as he is now. I think certainly it gave him the opportunity to show what a decisive Prime Minister he can be, what a good leader he can be, how he led for us and led the international community there. You're going to have ups and downs. It's bound to be in the sort of crisis we're in.
An opportunity to blame the rest of the world for something that was as much intrinsic to what happened here.
You can't say it started here. No, you really can't say it started here.
I was careful not to, but actually
did,
many of his policies have entrenched what has happened in the US to make things even worse here.
Well, I think you have to start with the fact that it's a global crisis. Just take the car industry, for example. We produce 3/4 of our cars for export markets. Why is that market down in December by 50%, very nearly 50%? It can't be because of this country. It's the global nature of the contraction, the recession that we're facing. And there's no doubt about it. There's no way in which Britain can affect a global recession or a global crisis. We're too small. It's America that affected that.
Peter Lilly, the rest of the world doesn't fit into your thesis that neatly, does it?
No, even if we had pursued different policies from the rest of the world, we would of course been affected by the situation in the rest of the world. But we pursued the same policies in America in spades. We had a bigger housing boom and bust. We had the highest level of personal indebtedness. We had loose monetary policy. We had a high deficit on our public spending and a high balance of payments deficit, all mirroring what was happening in the United States. And as a result, it was a British bank, Northern Rock, which went down first, well before Lehman's collapsed in the United States of America.
And this is what Adair Turner was pointing to last night, this inability to stop soaring debt. The tripartite system, I mean, you were there in '97, you saw this coming together. Nobody stood there and said, right, we're going to have to make sure this doesn't get out of hand.
In '98, I don't think it was anywhere near out of hand in those days, and the tripartite system was very sensible. I don't think that's got anything to do with it at all. But you mentioned Northern Rock.
Well, it has in the sense that everyone missed the opportunity to regulate,
We all did,
didn't
as
they?
did the international community, as did... Why don't we just take the board of directors of these banks concerned? They're the people who did it. If you want to get down to the blame game, take the non-executive directors. What were they doing? They're paid six-figure sums to make sure their directors, their executive directors, lend and borrow prudently. And we have one bank, the Royal Bank of Scotland, actually borrowing and lending, you know, 1,750 billion. We say these things, you know, with thousands of times the effect of it. And there's no murmur of anything till afterwards.
A free market, you should be looking at the directors, not the government.
In any free market, you need prudential regulation of the banks. We ceased to have prudential regulation of the banks with that tripartite system.
No,
essentially, you had regulation of consumer protection, but the direct link between the Bank of England and the banking system was weakened, if not broken.
Well, hang on, Peter Lilly.
And I warned about it at the time. I was Shadow Chancellor at the time it happened. And I said it would work for a while because the people doing the regulation had worked together within the Bank of England. But after a while, it would cease to work and it wouldn't be a strong system when a crisis broke.
Let's not dodge the issue. The regulation has not been good, should be better, but I totally disagree with what Peter says. When we discussed it with Eddie George, the Bank of England, he says, I must have the powers to prevent a systemic collapse of the banks, and we gave him those powers, that responsibility. Everybody wants to pass the buck, and I think there's a limited gain to be obtained here in playing that particular blame game.
OK, but let me bring you to where we are today.
Yes.
The pound has dived. The markets do not seem to like this new insurance scheme, and the polls are suggesting that they would no longer put Gordon Brown as the man to lead them out of a recession. You've got to admit that people are starting to, if you like, wise up to the fact that the mistakes are with Labour.
Well, there are mistakes all round, and we as the government have got to take our fair share of those. There's
but
no
it's
question
interesting
about
that nobody has really said that in government, has there? I mean, there are people who are desperate to hear the government fess up, if you like, to some of the problems that they've caused.
Nobody knew, I'm sorry to emphasise this point, what the banks were doing. I mean, how could the Royal Bank of Scotland lend more than the entire GDP of the UK?
Okay.
Underlying it all was loose monetary policy pursued by Greenspan. Gordon Brown made Greenspan an honorary knight for services to financial stability And now Gordon Brown says it's all America's fault or Greenspan's fault. He can't have it both ways.
I'm so sorry, we have to leave it there, but